So, picture this. It's 1992, and a German toxicologist is testing 9 ancient Egyptian mummies, one of them from the time of Ramesses II. What she found? Well, it should have been completely impossible. She found cocaine, tobacco, hashish. The whole story really kicks off with Dr. Svetlana Balabanova in Germany. She was running what should have been a pretty standard set of tests on these ancient remains. You know, the kind of thing that usually tells you about their diet, maybe their health. But this time was very, very different. So her team used these incredibly sensitive methods. We're talking gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. And they detected clear chemical signatures for cocaine, nicotine, and THC. And these weren't just faint hints. This stuff was embedded deep in the hair, the skin, and even the bones. The finding was so wild, the first thought had to be, this is a mistake. And that, right there, is the heart of the whole mystery. The coca plant, which gives us cocaine, and the tobacco plant, where nicotine comes from, are native to the Americas. They just weren't supposed to be anywhere in the Old World until after Columbus sailed in 1492. So the question is, how did these substances get inside mummies who died thousands of years before that? As you can imagine, this discovery just lit a fire under the world of archaeology and history. It kicked off a massive controversy that pulls in everything from botany to some really out-there theories about our past. So let's dig in and break down what the evidence actually tells us. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the shocking discovery itself and the scientific pushback it got. Then we're going to explore the 3 main explanations for how this could have happened. After that, we'll see how this whole mystery fits into a bigger picture of similar claims. And we'll wrap up with 3 huge questions that we still don't have answers for. All right, first up, let's look at that original study and the reaction. To say the scientific community was skeptical, well, that would be putting it mildly. Okay, so let's look at the data. Balabanova's team was clever. They didn't just test Egyptian mummies. They also tested Peruvian mummies from before Columbus arrived. Those were kind of like their control group. And yeah, as you'd expect, the Peruvian mummies tested positive. But the bombshell, the absolute shocker, was that the Egyptian mummies, some dating back over 3,000 years, showed the exact same results. And right away, you have this huge clash. In one corner, you've got this raw, seemingly undeniable chemical data. And in the other corner, you have, well, pretty much all of accepted history and archaeology. The most logical counter-argument was simple. Contamination, right? Maybe museum handlers who smoked or used drugs handled the mummies. Or, and this is a big one, maybe they were dusted with tobacco-based insecticides back in the 19th or 20th century to keep bugs away. Now, this whole debate didn't just go away. Decades later, people are still dissecting the original work. In fact, a huge critical review from 2023 by a researcher named Giorgio Samarini went back and looked at all of Balabanova's papers on this. And honestly, he raised some really serious red flags. It turns out the scientific foundation for this whole thing might be pretty shaky. Critics pointed out a ton of problems. For one, a serious lack of control samples. For most of the mummies she tested, we have no idea where they even came from. Her published papers were often super short, like barely a page, with all sorts of inconsistencies in the data. And here's a real kicker. The drug levels she reported were sometimes so high they were similar to modern-day users, which just seems impossible after thousands of years. It all led to some pretty strong suspicions, ranging from simple contamination to maybe even data being faked. Okay, but despite all the serious problems with the original research, the idea itself is just too fascinating to drop. So let's just imagine for a second the findings were real. How in the world could we explain them? Well, it really boils down to 3 main theories. Theory number 1 is the blockbuster movie version, ancient transatlantic contact. This is the idea that the Egyptians, who were incredible sailors, actually crossed the Atlantic thousands of years before Columbus, met people in the Americas, and set up trade routes to bring back things like coca and tobacco. Theory number 2 is the one most mainstream scientists lean towards, and it's the most straightforward: modern contamination. This just argues that the drugs got into the mummy systems after they were dug up, from pipe-smoking Victorian archaeologists or curators' hands, or very possibly from those nicotine-based insecticides used to preserve museum collections. Then there's theory number 3, which is a really fascinating middle ground. This one says we don't need ancient voyages or clumsy curators. What if there were other plants, right there in Africa or Asia, that could produce the exact same chemicals? Maybe they're extinct now, or maybe they're just relatives of the plants we know today. And this isn't just a wild guess either. Botanists will tell you that the plant genus Erythrocylum, that's the family the South American cocoa plant belongs to, is huge. It has over 200 different species around the world. And guess what? Some species right there in Africa and India have been found to contain traces of cocaine. So it's totally possible the Egyptians found a native source, or maybe an ancient version of these plants was way more potent. Now, to really get a handle on the cocaine mummy mystery, we have to zoom out a bit, because this isn't the only claim of ancient Egyptians showing up in the Americas. We need to look at the wider pattern and figure out how we can separate what might be feasible from what's just fiction. A classic example you hear about all the time is the story of the Egyptian cave in the Grand Canyon. Back in 1909, a newspaper ran this crazy front-page story about a Smithsonian expedition finding a huge underground cavern full of Egyptian artifacts. The only problem? It was totally made up, a journalistic hoax. The Smithsonian has said time and time again they have zero records of this expedition or the people involved. But what about the actual journey? Could an ancient ship even make it across the Atlantic? Well, this is where the legendary explorer Thor Heyerdahl comes in. He actually built ancient-style boats to test it. In 1947, his raft Kon-Tiki proved you could get from South America to Polynesia. And then, in 1970, his papyrus boat, the Ra II, sailed all the way from Morocco to Barbados. He proved that an ancient Egyptian-style ship could, in fact, survive the trip. And this brings us to an absolutely crucial point. Heyerdahl was a master of what we call experimental archaeology. He never claimed to have proved that Egyptians did sail to America. He only proved that it was technologically possible, and that is a huge difference. Proving something could have happened is not the same as proving it did happen. So what would a real, solid proof of ancient contact even look like? Well, we have a perfect example. A massive study in the journal Nature in 2020 found conclusive genetic proof, actual DNA evidence of contact between Polynesians and Native Americans around the year 1200. See, it wasn't based on sketchy chemical tests or a weird artifact. It was written in the human genome. That's the gold standard of evidence, and it's a standard the Egyptian theory has never even come close to meeting. So, where does all of this leave us? The truth is, the evidence is messy, it's contradictory, and we are left with some major unanswered questions. First, the botanical question. Are we absolutely 100% sure that there were no plants in ancient Africa or Asia that could produce cocaine and nicotine? It's entirely possible that species existed back then that are extinct now, or that the local plants just had different chemical makeups. Second, there's the scientific question. Given all the serious flaws in that original 1992 study, the missing controls, the bad documentation, the wonky data, can we really trust any of it? Without brand new, independent tests on those exact same mummies using today's best methods, the original finding will always be under a cloud of suspicion. And that leads us to the final and biggest question, and this one's for you. After looking at all of this, the shaky science, the plausible alternatives, the lack of any real proof, what do you think is the most likely answer? Are we looking at a lost chapter of human history, or is the real explanation something a lot less dramatic?